oh yeah, well, that, one time I did want to do this and, it was an issue here. Real, like what you said, usable real life experiences, I think would help guide us too. So if we can make that part of the process.
If I can also respond to the council member's comment. A lot of those issues, like you mentioned, a puddle or what we're considering a minor cross slope violation, and I agree with you that you have better locations to go and spend your money on. There's much more severe locations where somebody could get hurt, not have access. So that's why we created this whole prioritization scheme, and we put the major projects, or at least what we determined initially to be the major projects, major issues to be fixed in the near term, and then something like, you're saying that some of the cross slopes that are not so severe on the Harbor Walk, shift those later on, because at some point you are going to have to probably refurbish the Harbor Walk, in which case that would be a better time to do it. And then on top of all that, if there were to be an ADA lawsuit, someone were to get hurt, then at least you can say that you are aware of the issue and you do have a plan to go in and make that improvement. And you can't fix everything in the near term. Some things are going to have to be shifted off, and that's why the more severe issues, those are being done now as opposed to later on.
Yes.
For instance, City Hall Annex, we do have handicapped accessibility from the garage. What we don't have is the front door down below.
Right.
There's you have a picture of it. And you gotta go up, it's a little curb there. We can fix that. We can go in and slope it, and it's done. And so that's something that we can take care of. It's noticeable, it's something we should do, and so we'll take care of that one. Yeah, right there. We can take care of that. But it's a guide, we consider this a guide.
Well, I think what we see there on the right is the linear park. Is that like a crack that's kind of a
Looks like a root to me.
a root or
There's a
something?
root
Oh, they
going through
show
there.
up
trip.
all the time.
Right, and those kind of things, I
all
know
the
the Public Works is always going around trying to, eliminate trip hazards.
And that's another catch-22. We want all these trees and plants and canopies.
Right.
And then we got to deal with that, So it's like you got to balance out, the two competing issues.
I agree. I think what my understanding of the ADA Act, having been a business owner who owned buses for a living, and you want to talk about accommodations, that was extremely expensive for us to do that. But in this case, I think what we really need to focus on, I think, is reasonable accommodations that are beneficial to those who need them, and take care of the things that we absolutely have to take care of and prioritize them, rather than just saying, okay, we're going to allocate $3 million to do all these renovations. I think we have to prioritize what has to be done versus what we want to have done in the long term.
So we are going to pass the resolution today, hopefully, but what's the next step? Because we do have that CIP.
Next step is to take the plan, it's a guide, and put together a more concrete, long-term idea on things that we can accomplish short-term and then other long-term, and share it with the ADA committee, and bring it back to you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, good.
Yes.
Just a quick question. Just assume, just for the sake of argument and hypothetically speaking, that the picture that you have shown here is the City Hall Annex. Let's just say that this was a structure that was built after the requirements for ADA went into effect, and notwithstanding the fact that maybe there was a plan that made sure that this door was accessible, for whatever reason it wasn't built out that way. Other than the civil liability side of things, what is the potential liability for a city from the federal government for failing to make that accessible?
The Department of Justice goes around and will go to random municipalities throughout the country and see if they have an ADA transition plan. I think they first check their website, and if the website doesn't have any mention of the ADA, mention the ADA transition plan, they'll come here, they'll inspect facilities, and if you don't have anything, if you don't approve this, you don't have any transition plan, then they will go and have penalties as well. You have one now, or hopefully you will have one, So if the DOJ were to come here, again, like you're saying, excluding the civil penalties of somebody not having access to it, then, you would have, I guess what I'm saying is you'd have issues with Department of Justice if there are no improvements made. We also find that there are people who are a serial ADA lawsuit.
Right, and that's why I'm gonna keep that.
Okay.
So let's just, again, going back to the hypothetical, so that I and the city council have a better understanding of the risk that that they may take. If hypothetically speaking, this was a recommendation in the transition plan to fix this access way, and the city declined to do that because they had other more pressing priorities, what would be the risk to the city getting fined by the Department of Justice?
For the record, again, Mitchell Austin, Urban Design. The Department of Justice looks for those ADA transition plans. If they find municipalities without them, they're more likely to do inspections for enforcement actions. In the case of a municipality that sees multiple lawsuits, they track those things. They will figure out if they have an ADA transition plan, and if they have one, why does that municipality keep getting, court actions against them? They'll delve deeper and determine whether or not that municipality is actually implementing their ADA transition plan. So if we were to serially not act on our adopted ADA transition plan, that could open us up to additional action by the Department of Justice and jeopardize federal grant funding.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
I just have one more question.
Yes.
Is this plan amendable as we go down the future?
Yes, you can make changes to this as you have new buildings, and you may need to potentially add items to this that were overlooked initially, and as you go and you make improvements, then cross them off the list. If you choose to change the prioritization scheme, then you're all more than welcome to do that as well, as long as you continue to make improvements and make fixes, a little bit at a time.
So going back to what Howard was saying, and you've been saying, this is basically, it's a transition plan, it's a guide, that as long as we are faithfully trying to work towards it in a reasonable way, from a Department of Justice standpoint, we should be clear.
That's correct.
We need a motion to approve the resolution.
Well, I have asked for clarification. So these documents, these 3 documents, is that the actual transition plan? Because some of this has been changed, so we're adopting something that's already not accurate. Well, I'm reading in the resolution that it talks about that the city has developed, in a past tense, a transition plan. You mentioned, though, you were going to take this and develop a plan, so it
Well, no,
confused me.
This is the plan.
This is the plan.
So
We
the,
are now going to prioritize, take a look at the projects, prioritize them, bring it to the ADA committee, and
Okay.
come back with a more fine-tuned, long-term capital improvements program.
okay,
But we have a plan. It
Okay.
is a guide.
okay.
So all we're approving is the resolution and not the allocation of funds at this time, right?
Right.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
I move approval of the resolution.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, to approve the resolution. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. And we will be hearing more about this in future council meetings. Okay, next we have the consent agenda, which has a lot of items on it. Approval of minutes, legal department invoices, finance department agreements, 3 agreements there. Urban Design Division has 3 Ford Chenep items. Does anybody want to pull anything off the consent agenda? Nope? Okay, citizens' comments on consent agenda. If you would like to speak on any of the consent agenda items, now would be the time. Would anybody like to speak on the consent agenda? Please make your way to the podium. Okay, seeing none.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously. Okay, next we move into the regular agenda. So now would be the time if you would like to comment on basically 4 items, which would be the selected contractor for the automated metering infrastructure systems, water meters. If you would like to comment on the agreement for the concrete for the expedition of the seawall slabs, the 2018 department performance objectives, and the Hurricane Irma update debris and seawall item, now would be the time. If you would like to speak on those 4 items, any one of those 4, anybody have comments on those 4 items? Now would be the time. Okay, seeing none, we will move into the ESC for the automated metering infrastructure system. Smart water meters.
Good morning. For the record, Marion Pace, Procurement Manager. The city solicited invitations to negotiate for the selection of a AMI or a AMR provider contractor for the city. The invitation to negotiate is one of the most flexible sourcing methods that is acceptable in governmental procurement. And basically, it's a way it's subjective and objective, but you can start with a car and end up with a motorcycle. You're allowed to have the discussions, the negotiations with the firms that go through the process. This process was set up with 3 different evaluation phases. The first phase was for the evaluation committee to review the written submittals and score them and to determine a competitive range for who would move forward to phase 2. The committee decided that all of the 4 bidders, Ferguson, HD Waterworks, Avanti, and Fortiline, were qualified to move forward to phase 2, that they had the qualifications and the system met our requirements. And also during that first meeting, we did go out initially for AMI or AMR services. Based on the small cost difference and the benefits of an AMI, the committee just decided to go forward with AMI. Phase 2, the committee received presentations and demonstrations from the 4 bidders, and they, again, ranked them all. And they motioned that all bidders' systems proposed qualified to proceed to phase 3 of the evaluation. At that time, we started negotiating with 3 of the bidders, because Avanti wanted to drop out. They wanted consideration to be removed from the process. And so we sat down with each of the firms and had discussion, what can yours do, and kind of fine-tune exactly what their systems had the capabilities and what we liked or what have you. And so we sat down with all of them, and once we went through that discussion, we were able to identify everything that the systems could do equally or, perform the same feature or had the same features. And so with that, those discussions, the committee determined what the city's best and final scope was to submit to the 3 remaining bidders for them to provide us specific information of maybe a little bit expanding on like the software or training and whatnot, and give us, we provided them with a very structured price proposal so everybody, we were apples to apples when we were going out to get the best and final offer on price. So the committee had to decide what the criterion weights were going to be, and the price was determined to be 50%, because basically when you're in this process, you have deemed that all of the bidders are qualified and they can provide everything that you need. So you're basically looking at your price now. And so when it came down to the evaluation, the final evaluation, Fortiline did come in ranked number 1, and committee is recommending them to move forward into negotiating an agreement.
Questions for Marion? Yep.
What do we think the timing is for implementation?
I believe they were, Tom, 1 year?
Sorry, I didn't hear the,
1 year?
1 year, okay. And where are the meters going to actually be physically located on the properties?
In the
Where
meter.
they are currently.
Okay, so right out by the road in the underground box?
Yes.
The homeowner will see, I'm sorry, Tom Jackson for the record. And all of the companies, and again, my hat's off to Marion, this was a very complex, even more so than the RO plan. I think we did more negotiating and more reviewing and more papers we had to read than to build the RO plan. And when it got down to the end of the day, and all of the bidders were obviously very qualified. They could all do exactly what we needed. It came down to Dave liked Ford, I liked a Chevy, IT had certain wants that they had, and so that's what we had to hash out. And then once we had a pick list, if you will, or a shopping list, then we said how much, and we went line item by line item. That's where we are today. The homeowner won't see anything different. They'll come in and they'll make an appointment, they'll change the meter out in some cases they'll retrofit a meter with the technology on it, be in and out of there with minimal interruption, if any interruption, and you won't notice the difference. It'll look the same as it does today.
Great. So I think it's a great program, and thanks for all the hard work. It's-
On that note, though, Tom, will the customer have any ability to look at,
Absolutely.
Okay.
One of the big things that all of the companies that we insisted that they demonstrate 2 or 3 different occasions was a customer consumer portal that they can access through our website. They can look at trends, they can look at what their usage is, their bills are, lots and lots of information.
Nancy?
A couple questions that people have asked me is, how much more are we going to be paying for this? And what I've emphasized is this has already been incorporated into our budget.
Yes.
So this is not something that we just decided to do yesterday. We've been talking about this for a long time.
That is
But
correct.
residents also have expressed an interest in somehow to prevent the situation happening where they get the bill today retroactively and to find out that they've got a leak and they've got this huge water bill that's developed, and that somehow the city will be able to find this out earlier and notify them. So I think those are kinds of things that,
Yeah.
Anything like that that we can do to help communicate the advantages of this to the residents is going to be very important, because residents were also commenting, it makes them feel like back when FPL was trying to put in smart meters and people resisted. And so I certainly don't want, this is not an option.
Yeah.
We're not offering this. This is, because it's such an advantage.
Well, the water meters won't catch your house on fire like some of the smart meters did, so that's advantage number 1. Number 2 is absolutely what we'll be able to do, and we're working through as we get the company on board and we go through the training ourselves. We're working through setting parameters where it can flag us if, let's say, for instance, you use 5,000 gallons a month, and then the first 3 days of the month you've used 1,000 gallons. A big red light comes on your account and notifies us. So in terms of leak detection and preventing those sorts of things, we're taking a giant step forward in our ability to do that. That's one of the reasons we opted to go to the AMI system.
Yes. So I think communicating these kinds of things as we move forward is really important so that we, the residents see the clear advantage of why we're doing this.
Yes.
So, thanks.
I guess they weren't paying attention when we rolled back that increase,
Yeah.
because we did.
No, oh, you're absolutely right, we did.
And did this project.
Right.
Right.
Kept this project in and rolled back the 4%.
Yes.
Remind them of that.
Yeah.
No, I
No, I
think
think
it's
that
great.
include those things in the weekly report
Right,
as
right.
well.
Just so, yeah, when the customer portals and all that go live, they know what we're talking about.
And that'll be a big part of the hardware, the meter change-outs and the retrofittings. I mean, that's standard stuff. We do that all the time. We replace 10% of the meters every year as it is. We're just going to replace pretty much or touch 100% of the meters in 1 year. So that's normal stuff we do routinely, we know how to do. The neat stuff will be Helen and her group and the finance when they get into the customer portals and the features that the customer can do and that we can do as operators of the system to help us be more efficient.
Thank you.
Guess if kids want to go into the meter reading profession, we should let them know that that's kind of not in anybody's future anymore.
I'm going to steer them towards the IT part of the meter
Yes.
reading, because there were more IT members on this committee than there were my jobs on this committee, trust me.
Any other questions?
No. I'll move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to approve. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Now, this is just the ranking. We're going to come back to you with an actual agreement.
Actual contract
Yes.
and,
Okay.
and scope of
Understand.
work and everything, yes.
And thank you for all that work and
Oh, thank you.
negotiating. I wouldn't want to be in negotiations with Mary.
Tough, too. She makes you read everything.
Okay, next we have Marion again for the concrete.
For the record, Marion Pace, Procurement Manager. We went out for bid for the purchase of marine-grade ready-mix concrete. We had to federalize this contract so that we could receive FEMA reimbursements. So this is basically the contract for the concrete to be able to pour the slabs.
How many responses did we get?
We received 2.
Questions for Marion?
This doesn't include the rebar, that'll be separate?
That'll be separate. The bid for rebar opens on Friday.
Okay.
And you previously approved the city manager to approve up to a certain amount because they're chomping at the bit to get another order.
I fully understand.
And then that'll come back at the next council meeting.
Okay, great.
And just to remind you guys, if this does get passed, you all have paperwork to sign.
Yes, conflict of interest. Sorry.
Okay.
Any other questions, motions?
I'll make a motion to approve the
Second.
contract.
We have a motion, a second to approve the award. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Each year, we put together major objectives for all the departments. This is how you evaluate the performance of the city manager and city clerk, and this is how the city manager evaluates the performance of the various department and division managers. These are just the major objectives. These are what we plan to undertake this fiscal year. Some will get accomplished, some will be started and go into the next fiscal year. So they're here in front of you. They go hand in hand with the budget and the strategic plan that was just approved.
Any amendments or comments? Do we need to?
It would be nice if you approved them so we can formally, then at the end of the fiscal year, we do our performance evaluations based on these.
Yes.
You know, I guess I say this every year, or at least I feel like I do, but it's all good. When I read these, though, I think of objectives. I know from my corporate experience, we had to have SMART objectives, and that were specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. And I look at these, and they read, in many cases, more like job descriptions and things that that you would just be expected to do because it is your position. So in some cases where, you know, I could go down here and say, well, if you took this one and you converted it, you could add a date by. I know Howard said, well, these are all next year, and he already explained it. But in some cases where you're going to hire a deputy clerk, by when? When do you intend to have that completed? Those kinds of things. And so that there's specific actionable kinds of things. It almost felt like perhaps Phil needed to add an objective to conduct how to write an objectives training by a certain date. And then we come back and we approve these objectives. You know, you don't need to have, you know, if we're going to have things like that, we don't need to have 10 objectives, but more 2, 3, 4, 5 that are really the measurable ones, and the other things can follow because these are just things that we're expected to do because that's our job. So that's where I struggled with this. I didn't have a problem with the content because I know in past years I've added things, I've suggested things, and those things are all in here. So it's just something I felt like I had to say. Thank you.
I mean, along that line, it's not a bad suggestion. Maybe at the 6-month mark, we put it on the agenda and go through it. I mean, is that something worthwhile, or, You know what I mean? Just to see where we're at mid-year, or you want specific dates?
Well, I'm looking at these lists of objectives where there are 5 pages of things. And for each department, some of these things are just things you have to do.
Right.
I mean, okay, so, is that an objective or is that your job? And if it's your objective, it's something you're trying to strive toward, something you're trying to achieve that's beyond what your normal job is. So you're trying to help the city advance or whatever. It might be, I look in the city manager, the last bullet, begin implementation of new city brand identity and standards. Certainly, we could convert that into an actionable kind of thing that would be achieve community acceptance by at a certain date and begin implementation. Or, I know that, but you could reword some of these things, some of them that are the most important things, that would be key things, that if we didn't do this, it would be, we would be remiss. So, anyway.
I mean, I see your point, but to what you just spoke to about, have community acceptance, then that adds just another level of how do we go about measuring that? Then we're putting ourselves under the gun to have some kind of measurement to say, okay, well, we did this and then we had to go back. It's kind of like on the TDC when we do the research for the events and stuff. Like, the research is so expensive, but then you want to know, did the money bring people here, and did it put the heads on the beds? And we always struggle with that at the TDC because the back end can cost as much as the front end, and then, you spent twice as much money trying to accomplish the goal. But the data is not unimportant, but it comes with a cost.
That one might not be one that, that the city manager might choose to say this is a top priority. It might be something that we would work on, but I'm just offering a suggestion.
Gary and then Lynn?
Okay. One of the questions that I have is, if you look at, for example, if you take the performance objectives in the police department, one of the objectives is coffee with the chief, yet I'm not sure that that's a viable program now. And we're gonna be getting a new chief. I think that should be something that should be available to him, so I'm not sure that it's current. And also, relative to this one, if you look in the fire department, they talk about their objectives with their volunteers, yet in the police department, you have over 800 hours a month with the VIPs, the volunteers in policing, and there's no mention in the performance objectives for this particular. And I'm only picking on these 2 departments because I know these the best, okay? I'm just saying is that I'm not sure how well thought out, quite frankly, some of these performance objectives are for each department. They almost seem like a cookie cutter to me in some respects.
Lynn?
I have to agree with Nancy. In my experience with corporate America, we always had, and particularly in the hospitality business when I was in it, we had monthly action plans that we had to complete a year out, and specific goals for each month that had to be attained that were measurable. And that's what our increases annually were based upon, what we achieved and what we didn't achieve. And then we had a list of specific goals and objectives, which might have been, let's just say I had to get 5 new corporate accounts in a given month, or I had to make X amount of sales in a given month. But then there was always ongoing things, and maybe we could do it that way, where we have things that are not necessarily measurable objectives that are part of the job, like we're saying, but then have specific goals in mind for each department head. And some of that is going to be, pushed on to other people in their departments to have the entire department achieve the goal as a whole team. But maybe that's the way it should be done in the future, rather than just a generic kind of a list of things that we would like to see happen.
Oh, I think they're gonna, if they don't happen, then that's where the evaluation comes in at the end.
Exactly.
I think, to some degree, because we're a service-oriented organization, that this type of thing, to some degree, a general approach like this, I think, is valid, because we want to have a high level of service, but continuity, and there may not be actual benchmarks in a lot of these things. I think some things would be, but some things are just going to be, we need to just keep this level of service. So maybe I think a combination between the 2, we may have the things which are quantifiable, identified, but also I do think the more general descriptions like this, I think, are also important.
Right, I agree.
So do we want to, what do we want to do with this?
I mean, I said we approve it as is, but with the understanding that we're gonna maybe add some performance benchmarks to it in its final form, something of that sort.
I'd like to see it tweaked before we approve it.
I would too.
I would too. I'd like to see it continue it and maybe bring it back. in the
So
first-
should we all just send Howard our individual recommendations for inclusion, and then, kind of like we do with the strategic plan, and then we can bring it back and go through that?
I like that.
Well, I don't know that, I think that the departments themselves can take a look at which of these might be the most important ones out of them. Some of them, I would agree, look at, well, I hope so, as I read it, yeah, okay, great. It's, we need to do that, but which ones would you want to make it? I mean, do you want the council members writing the objectives for the departments? We want the departments writing the objectives and working with Howard. And I think I would rather have it that way and have our HR director help, teach people about SMART objectives.
I think it'll be a good learning experience as well.
I mean, some of it is, like informational, like, okay, well, this position's turning over, you know what I mean? Like, how would you make that SMART?
You might not. I mean, when
And
I
you
look at.
drop it off, or you keep it on?
Well, it's, these are, the department, I mean, I don't want to pick on any department in particular, but, I'm looking at one right now. I see integrate new fire inspector position into the operations. I hope so, I mean, it's, how do you, so some of these, I think,
I've been silent so far, but go ahead.
I think the roadmap for the utilities department is probably the one that's the easiest to meet that ultimately, because it does have quantifiable objectives. We're building an RO plant. We already have a timeline, hopefully, that things will happen. They may not happen exactly the way we hope them, but there's the timelines of that. And when they say things like take proactive approach towards geographical information system and electronic mapping, okay, they're taking a proactive, you can put a timeline out, when are we gonna have that done? But going back to the volunteer programs, is the objective to maintain them at their present level? Is the objective to pare them back a little bit? Is their objective to increase citizen employment? Those are measurable objectives that the city uses anyway. I mean, we use these programs anyway, whether we want to maintain them, whether we want to expand them or integrate them with another one. So those are also the measurable types of objectives that could be integrated, I think, into this type of evaluation.
I'm hearing your objectives are too generic. That's what I'm hearing. So what are you hearing?
Well, from a city manager standpoint, these objectives are based as how I would evaluate the departments and the divisions. Integrate new finance director into operations. Our finance director is going to be retiring, I think it's May or June. And one of his functions is to make sure that there is succession planning in place and so that there is a seamless transition. So to me, from a city manager standpoint, that is a very critical objective, that has to be undertaken this fiscal year. Because our finance director has been here for 55 years practically. So that is a very critical objective that I will be looking at from a finance department perspective.
But there's a timeline on that, correct?
This fiscal year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's
but I
the
mean-
point we're making.
But even in this fiscal year, it's within this fiscal year, there is a time.
Right.
It's not just this fiscal year, it is by, it may be hire this person by a certain date and conduct, transition into that role or however it is. But adding some specificity to some of these that are the most important ones. Some of the other ones become, and this is how we'll, other things we'll do, but these are things that are just expected, you know?
I mean, we can certainly take some off the list if that's what you would like. We don't have to, but again, these are things that at the end of the fiscal year,
Right.
the department and division managers have to provide a status of how well they performed during that fiscal year. Now, it should be as no surprise at the end of the fiscal years because we talk all the time. We get updates all the time.
Right.
But it's a formality at the end of the fiscal year to evaluate how well we've done on these. We can certainly come back with a little more specificity if that's what you'd like. We can do that.
And you could put that on Howard's evaluation. That goes on yours from
That's right.
council members,
That's right, correct.
right?
I mean, when I gave you how to evaluate my performance, I gave you ideas on these topics, just ideas. I didn't place any value judgments on them. So that's how we do it. We can come back with more. We can put it on the next council agenda with a little more specifics.
If you want it on the next one, or if you want it in November, I mean.
Yeah,
it's-
the first of November would be okay.
We can do that too. I'm just trying to get these done.
So if
I hear
there,
ya.
if there are time frames,
Yes.
definitely include that.
We can do that. We can include some timeframes.
That would be helpful.
Yes, some timeframes, things you want to do it by, so that it's not just by this fiscal year, but it's really by when. Think about it, because it's really taking the action that's important. A lot of this is important, but in some cases, you know, when I look at this and you say, well, I'll go to Karen and the city clerk, rewrite public records well, maybe that's to conform to current laws, I think, and standard practices and provide training to key personnel. I don't know if that's one that you do every year, if that's just an ongoing activity, or if that's definitely something that was different and it's new and it's something that needs to be completed by a certain time. So that's where it's really, some of these might just be ongoing, but some of these might be, they really do need to happen.
I do see where you're coming from, and for the public records policy has actually been rewritten. This would be a continuation of implementing the rewrite, and it would be done this year, and the training will be done this year, and I've already started that process, but I can absolutely put timeframes on that. And same thing with the deputy clerk. I know when she's leaving, and my comment would be that I would fully integrate a new hire within the 6-month probationary period. You know,
there you
that
go.
they would be fully, okay, so does that
Yes,
work?
uh-huh.
And the quality summarizations of the actions taken at meetings, you know, that's what we do. We produce minutes. But that's also one of my major performance measures because we do so much of that. And the performance, it's measured based on whether or not we get those minutes done in time for the next meeting for approval at the very next meeting. That's timely for us, and our goal is that is what our goal is. So I could probably add a time frame to that as well, to say that minutes will be provided, you know, for approval at the next meeting, or to add some more. Is that what would that help?
I think that's adding some timeframes like that, so it really is showing, you know,
And maybe the second one with the IT, with the streamline operations and automate process workflows, like where applicable, you could give examples. Because I know you have looked at things, maybe we didn't, you know.
That was actually a suggestion that came from you to add to our objectives. I believe we added that last year for the first time. And we do meet with IT, and we sometimes we come up with things. Sometimes we're using the most current technology that's available. And the other thing for the clerk's office is, in relation to that, is we don't have a lot of opportunities for new projects. I mean, we keep records. So, not, you know, that could be a little boring, but definitely for, I can give a couple of examples
Yeah,
where we.
because I know you looked at like the voice to text conversion, software, but it's really not there yet. They still would have to go through it and wouldn't really save them a lot of time, but she went through that process, So just, I guess, give some examples so that at the end of
Right.
the year, we could
And
say,
a-
so
and
how did
another-
that go? Or,
yeah.
where did we
And
fall
another
with that?
process that we went through was to obtain public records request tracking software. Well, we went through that, we met with vendors, but it was determined that it wasn't cost-effective at this time, and so even though we went through that, we're not actually implementing anything, so.
Maybe just to make this simple, and rather than locking in a specific month on specific goals, you could each take these lists that are here and prioritize them by quarter, and do a quarterly review at the end of each quarter. It's measurable, it's a measurable benchmark at that point. And then you also have a list of things that are ongoing, that are constant objectives that will continue to be ongoing forever. But that might help organize your department even better for the internal flow of information and positivity within the department. I think that might help keep things on track. And then you guys can even, as a department, sit and look each quarter and say, oh, we need to get this done, or we need to push this into the second quarter, or whatever it might be. But maybe that's an easier way to prioritize it.
Well, I would say some of these you might just have as part of the ongoing list, but the other ones definitely
Right.
time-bound.
I don't want to make it complicated.
I
but-
guess you're bringing it back.
We are bringing this back
Bring it
at the
back.
first meeting in November.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
We are bringing it back. I wrote that down.
Okay.
With a date and time certain. Thank you. Okay, Hurricane Irma update, debris and seawall.
Good morning. For the record, Rick Keeney, Director of Public Works. I'll be covering the debris portion, and Mark Gehring will cover the seawall portion. On the map, if we can go to the east side and the west side of downtown. Just want to give you an update where the hauler is and estimated time frame that they believe they'll be finished. As of today, we're right at 5,500 cubic yards, so we believe we're close to halfway of cleaning up the yard waste debris. And then I'll just go through town, and I'll explain what the city crews are doing at the end. We started on the east side of the downtown area, and then we moved over to the west side of the downtown area. And the reason we started in that area is that was the heaviest debris throughout the whole city. That's where they're collecting most of the debris at. The east side is almost finished being completed. We believe another truck full. The truck with the trailer holds just over 100 cubic yards. So they believe there's just under 100 cubic yards there. Maybe a little over it, maybe 2 trucks, but they feel they're almost done in that area. Yes.
How long does it take to fill a truck?
Well, if they're nice big piles, very quickly. But now what they're getting into is the scattered piles.
Okay.
So they have to drive, they've got to park, set up the truck, get on the back and use the clamshell,
Okay.
pick up their booms, drive to another location. So that can be a little time consuming because you're driving around
So residents could consolidate their piles?
Told them not to,
yeah,
No?
because they need to charge it to an address. So we told them,
Yeah, what they're doing now is they don't have to write down every address because there is so much strewn around, so.
we told
But
them,
anyway, it's big piles, they're getting them, they got it all mapped out, all's good. Now on the west side in the historic area, and then going back into the Gray Street area, McGregor, that's all one area. They believe they'll have that done in about 2 to 3 days. They have 1 truck working in that area. And then if you go to the bird section area, They've been working in the bird section, and they believe they'll have that finished today, hopefully. And then the next area they'll go to is they'll go west. Yes, in that area. They're going to have 2 trucks working in there. The first thing I should have mentioned is either this afternoon or tomorrow morning, they'll have 3 trucks. So we're supposed to have another new truck. That's how come they think they can up production and get this done. So they'll have 2 trucks working in that area tomorrow. Again, they think that's going to take about 3 days. Then they're going to move north
Gosh,
to
my stuff is never getting
north of
picked up.
Acquiesta, and then also that Bow Harbor area in the pink. Again, another 2 to 3 days in that area once they get into it. And then they're going to go south of town, and they're going to get Burnt Store Isles and Burnt Store Meadows. They believe once they get into there, they're going to use 2 trucks. They think they'll be able to knock that out in about a day once they get the 2 trucks in that area. Day, maybe a day and a half. So if everything goes well and we get to keep 3 trucks, their estimate is next Friday. They hope to be completed. That's called the first push. That's all we're going to be requiring them to do is the first push. We're still looking at our parks. As a matter of fact, our debris hauler is meeting with Bonnie Harris, our parks person, this morning. They've maybe done, and they're getting a game plan for the parks. Problem with the parks is a lot of the parks are wet. Can't get in there without tearing it up. So if we feel it's going to tear the park up and it's going to cause a lot of damage, we're just going to have them take what we can get to, and then we'll just have to do it in-house in a month or so when things dry up.
What is our city truck doing?
Okay, our city truck,
Can I call and get on his list?
so what we're doing, because we had citizens call in, and so what the deal was, the city has resumed normal yard waste collection, not the tractor piles, but if the debris is in a bag or in a can or a couple palm fronds, we pick that up with our regular yard waste truck. What we're trying to do is help out the hauler and help out the citizens. If it was 1 scoop with the clamshell, then we pick it up when we go by. Because again, I talked to you about how for the hauler to set that big truck up and just get 1 scoop, it's just very time consuming, and we want them to focus on the big stuff and get the town cleaned up. So that's how we're working with our city trucks.
Rick, where are we taking all this debris? Is it going to Zemmel Road?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they have a yard waste, a mulching operation out there, and it goes there.
Okay.
That helped us, by the way.
Yes.
Helped us big time by being able to go just to Zemmel Road.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, I'm amazed. October 13th is a week from Friday. That's,
If all goes well and
Yeah.
we keep 3 trucks. We're
Yes.
fortunate to have trucks.
Yes, we are.
yes, we are. I think
When you
that's,
consider what Cape Coral just
that's huge, getting 1 more truck.
We have a few
I-
citizens that don't understand that, but that's,
And I believe the city manager has probably told you, we've had 2 trucks, and then 1 disappears, and then we get another truck. So it's, so hopefully we can keep the 3 trucks. If we can, then we feel pretty good that by the end of next week, hopefully, we'll be done.
This is the easier of the 2 issues.
Yes. Well, I think anything we can do to communicate this, even if it's putting it up on the website.
It'll be on the
Or whatever.
weekly. It'll be in the weekly and our
Weekly.
website.
Yeah,
It'll be
great.
in there.
Good morning, Mark Gehring, doing the seawall update. The ribboning we've completed that. We enlisted help from utilities, code, building, anybody who had folks available last weekend, we enlisted them and got all the sites ribboned. We are finding that residents are tearing the ribbon down, it's blowing down. We've had phone calls, are they allowed to cross it to go to their boat dock? What we're advising them in that case is for them to inspect their own situation and make a determination whether or not they can go through there. But we felt it was the responsibility of the city to at least make that first notice that the area is not potentially not safe. We continue pipe repairs. We've completed about a dozen outfall pipes that have gone through seawalls that have broken off or something. And the problem there is if we leave that broken off behind the seawall, the water continues to swirl behind the seawall, creating a big pit in the yards. So we've done 12 of those. We've done about 6 places where we've gone and taken plastic sheeting and sandbags and reinforced the slopes. These are areas between homes that we've found that were eroding severely. The erosion has gone back 5 or 6 feet from the house in some places. So we've taken this plastic sheeting, laid it on the ground, holding it down with sandbags, and then putting black plastic pipe on the downspouts so that we get the downspout water away from the erosion. The big problem with between the houses, if you take an average house where you have a pool cage and you have 20 or 25 foot of grass flowing down to the seawall, you have about 25 square feet flowing over the seawall in that area. If you have a 2,000 square foot house and half of it drains to one side and the other house next door drains to that side, and they both shoot all that water, do the math on it, it's like 1,000 times more water than is falling on the rest of the lot. So we're encouraging residents who are having any erosion to look at diverting that pipe, the downspouts, preferably to the front of the house if it's possible, but at least back away from the erosion. Just drape a hose out into the eroded area so that the water flows down the hose and into the erosion rather than taking the soil with it. So that's the advice that we're giving residents right now. We're getting all kinds of phone calls from folks of what they're able to do, what they can't do, what the city's going to do for them. We're investigating all kinds of ideas. We get a magazine which usually went in a pile called Erosion Control, and we're going through that very carefully now and talking to different vendors. We're looking at, well, we had a status quo of how we did seawall repairs for many years, but when you need to do 900 of those, all that stuff is useless. We saw last week on on local news, they showed a family in Cape Coral who was installing steel sheet pile in their yard until which time that they can get a seawall installed. The problem with that's probably $100, $150 per foot. So that's half the cost of the seawall. We don't have that kind of funds available to do that to everyone's yard while we wait for, and then if we wanted to hire a contractor to do 12 miles or 15 miles of steel sheet pile, he'd probably have to search the entire country to find that much, and then finding a contractor that can actually do that because all of the contractors are swamped right now as it is. So we're still investigating things, but the best thing that we found is downspout pipes and plastic sheeting at this point. We still have one crew that's dedicated to filling depressions, as we were before the storm, but you got to imagine how many depressions there are out there that aren't associated with seawall failures. So they're continuing to work on that. The backlog is huge, but they're continuing to work on it. Today you approved the contract for concrete. Friday, I think we opened for the steel rebar. Those are the two main materials for constructing seawall panels. As well, we're purchasing all the other associated items that go with the seawall panels. So we'll have those ready to go. We're putting the final touches on 2 contracts right now that you'll be seeing. One of those is for a concrete contractor to pour seawalls, bring his men and pour seawalls in our yard in addition to our folks pouring seawall panels. And the other contract is for seawall contractors to come in and install seawall. The map that we have here shows 8 different zones that we intend to break the work up into. That contract, right now, we're, as a group, deciding that we would like to award a maximum of 3 work zones to any one contractor to ensure that we get more than one contractor here. Even at the award of 3 work zones, it's going to be much more work than what our contractor is used to performing. We think that that's probably a good number to give them 3. It gives them plenty of room to expand their business in this time of, so much work being out there. But if it's possible, the concurrence of this board would be would be great to support that. That's a reasonable number that we ensure that we get several contractors involved. We will require that they provide us a list of equipment that they're going to dedicate to the project, and then each set of equipment needs to be dedicated to one project simultaneously to each of the projects that they are awarded, so that we don't have a case where we bid the work out and they have a year or a year and a half to complete the work, but yet they don't start it for 6 or 8 months in that district. We want every district to be working simultaneously, and that's our goal. So is there any thoughts immediately on the awarding to 3 zones maximum to a contractor?
Great idea.
Okay. The next thing, we will begin next week doing our detailed investigations of all of these failures, but we have done some preliminary investigations, and these maps were put onto the website yesterday. And what they're showing, and we're very glad to see this, is that our new seawall is not failing. We don't have a massive failure of new seawall that we initially thought, oh my God, everything just blew out. If you look on this map, the beige areas are the original seawall installed by Punta Gorda Isles. Again, all of these maps.
Yellow to us.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, yellow. Those areas are original seawall. The green are seawalls that were installed prior to 2009 when we did the redesign. And the blue is new seawall that, following an engineering study that was done in 2009 for a complete redesign of the panels. And on these maps, you'll find that there's very little blue that is even associated with a failure. But when we go out to that actual site, what we find is that that homeowner called in a complaint that their seawall had fallen, but it stops right at the new seawall. We're finding that almost systematically throughout the district. So that gives us a lot of relief that what we're starting to rebuild is not going to just fall down in the next storm as well. And if I could draw your attention to these 2 areas here. This is some of the things that we're looking at. We zoom in a little bit.
Orange is the fallen seawalls.
This area right here, you see there's a red dot, a red line in the middle of that blue seawall. That's very concerning to us because that person has entirely new seawall to the right and left of him. And that one indication there, we need to really investigate that and find out if there's something that went wrong on that one. That's only 1 out of 900. Other places on the map, like this one here, you'll see that the red encroaches onto the blue. When we get out there and investigate that, chances are that that blue did not fail. It's probably just failed right up to the blue. And we'll be doing a much more thorough investigation of that. So I guess the good news from this is that it's the old walls that are failing. We didn't have a systematic failure of the new walls. But the bad news is that we still have, after this work is completed, about 60 miles of original PGI seawall still standing out there in the aisles. So with that, I'll take any questions, any comments, and
Good question. Do we have any idea of the 900 properties that are affected? How many boats are involved in those 900 properties? Even a ballpark percentage?
not even looked at that whatsoever.
Okay.
Lots and lots.
Yes?
One, I wanted to commend you all. Like, even the first time I ever went to your seawall program, it's like, it's amazing. It's like going to Star Trek, so I have to commend that. One thing I would say for us, if there's any, I guess, assistance needed in terms of envisioning this whole situation, I ask that we appropriate what's necessary in terms of engineering and consultancy. And I say this because talking to some old timers, the only people say if you're 80 over, people were here when Donna came and it sucked. The last time the water sucked out of the canal was during that time, and so it's kind of not in anyone's mind. And so if there is any assistance needed on that, I'd say that we should give support to our team. And I guess my context for this is that before I moved back here, I was in Japan and I was affected by the tsunami. And they had very well-designed plants, but the problem was an actuary left out the fact that the water rose to a certain level, like literally 1,000 years ago, and that was left out of the table. And so when it came time to the disaster, the generators were flooded. It get critical simply because that wasn't envisioned, and so I just want to make sure that we give our team support they need, if anything you need in terms of just, I guess, a macro picture for the seawall infrastructure, that we do that for you.
I want to just bring a subject up that we talked about at the last meeting. Since the last meeting, I have met with the Boaters Alliance, and we have worked out a program whereby people can go on, it's in the works, it's not completely set up yet, but we have a program that we're going to be setting up that we will have a page on the Boaters Alliance website where anybody who has a dock available that they would like to make available to someone temporarily while their seawall's being replaced, there will be docks available. And we will have another link on the website that will, if you need a dock for your boat, you can click the link and you will send an email to the president of the Boaters Alliance, and he will in turn send a list out to that person of all the docks that are available to anybody who may need one. We're in the process of setting that all up right now, so we'll be publicizing that as soon as it gets up and running on their website. We're going to be going to the media and giving the media information about it, so I've already talked to Rusty about doing a piece on it so that we can put it in the Sun, and